Hi guys. So the endgame is a great part of the game where you learn a completely different style of playing. When I'm trying to make these videos, it's impossible to cover everything about chess endgames, but I try to cover as many different parts as possible. Now this example, white to move and to win, is a great example of the area that the king is defending. Now, the immediate area that these kings are defending is also quite big, but then there are these distances from the king, and one king can really control both sides of the board in the endgame. Now, when we count distances, this king has 4 squares or 4 moves from that a4 pawn. We often talk about a square. Let's say that this pawn is now, or this king is in the square of that pawn, and now that it's white's move, black is fine. If the black king would be here and it would be white's move, then white would queen. But on the pawn's move, if the king is in the box, then the king is fine. So what does that tell us? It tells us that this king cannot get outside of the box. It cannot go to these squares ever, or this pawn will queen. So this king is kind of stuck on this side of the board. Now when we look at black pawns, black has a supported passed pawn, which is going to be difficult for white to stop. And black would like to play g5 to have these what's it called? Well, the pawns would be side to side, covering all those squares on the 4th rank, and then white would not be able to play f4 without losing a pawn, and white would not be able to access these pawns unless by maybe triangulating them somehow like this. But white is a great move here, the only winning move, which is f4. That looks like a pawn sacrifice, but remember, if black takes, then this pawn will queen, so black has to kind of juggle between these pawns. Black has to stay close to both pawns. So black probably wants to play something like maybe d5 here, or e4, or d6 even. If d5, then white can continue with f5. Now this pawn can't move at all, so now the only problem is this pawn. Now what can the king really do? If the king gets to the a file and kills this pawn, then okay, this the black king is too far away from the king side, and this white king is just gonna capture both of black's pawns, and this pawn will queen. So let's look at that. King g3, king h4, takes, king here, takes, and this pawn will just queen. So instead maybe h4, king to g2, and notice how these pawns are just immune, because this pawn protects the a pawn and the a pawn protects the f pawn. So this is actually a win for white. if king e4, then white can still play f5, and that pawn cannot be taken. h4, king g2, and there's like a glass wall here that just prevents the black king from coming to this side of the board. It's like this pawn is tying down this king. So yeah, this is also a win for white. So I thought I would share this interesting, very paradoxical endgame.